Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you've ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. Since 2009, our radio program hosted guest experts from around the globe sharing their perspectives, experiences, and expertise while giving you food for thought. If you can't listen live, then download and listen to any of our 300-plus podcasts in our library at texasconflictcoach.com. So sit back, relax, or join the conversation every Tuesday evening, or tweet us at TXConflictCoach.
Good evening, everyone. Conflict is a dynamic and unfolding process which can be rich with opportunities to explore and understand perspectives. And in this episode, we have Cinnie Noble, who will talk with us about the quest for conflict intelligence, how questions help us find our way through conflict. She is the pioneer of conflict management coaching and is the creator of the CINERGY Model. Now, in her own discovery and journey over the years, she has used the phrase conflict intelligence to mean the competence in our self-awareness, our insight into others, and the knowledge and skills to manage interpersonal conflict effectively. In our most recent book, Conflict Mastery, Questions to Guide You, she will discuss with me how questions and the use of metaphors can be skillfully used to explore how one might think or feel differently about the conflict they are experiencing. Now, more specifically about Cinnie, she is, and it's Noble, N-O-B-L-E. She is a lawyer and a mediator, and in fact an advanced practitioner with the Association for Conflict Resolution, and she's a professional certified coach based in Toronto, Canada. Now, using her CINERGY model, she coaches people worldwide in their efforts to improve the way they engage in their interpersonal conflicts. Cinnie and her associates also train coaches, mediators, lawyers, HR professionals, psychologists, social workers, leaders, and others around the world to use her unique evidence-based coaching model. She is the author of 5 books, including Conflict Management Coaching, the CINERGY Model. And in fact, I want to say thank you for those who are joining us in the chat room, and we encourage you to leave your questions and comments there. We'll bring it into the show. And for those who are also Twittering online and listening, we're using the hashtag TCCRadio. But what I'd like to say is the first person to share one takeaway or the thing that really stood out for you from this episode today will get you a copy of Cinnie's new book, Conflict Mastery, Questions to Guide You. So we encourage you to leave your comment on Twitter, which is at TXConflictCoach, or our Facebook page, Conflict Connections, or email me at Pattie, P-A-T-T-I-E, at conflictconnections.com. So a number of ways that you can leave that comment, or especially your takeaway from this, and we'll get you that book. So tonight, again, we have Cinnie Noble, and thank you, Cinnie, for joining us and returning back to the program.
Oh, thanks so much, Patty. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, absolutely. So we do have guests in the chat room, so let's get started because we have a lot of things to talk about, and I was really excited about getting your book hot off the press because you'd worked on it for a long time and already been doing stuff on the blog. So let's talk about the Conflict Mastery, Questions to Guide You. What is it all about?
Well, it's about expanding perspectives on common aspects of the conflict experience before, during, and after they arise through the use of reflective questions and commentary. And so what I've looked at is that we all experience conflict at different times, sometimes through, before, during, and after conflict, but sometimes it might be at one more prevalent, either before it starts or after or while we're in it. And so I decided that it would be a great way of helping us all look at, can we determine what's happening for us in the moment in order to understand more what we're experiencing and what we can do about what we're experiencing.
So you mentioned, helping us all. So who really benefits most from reading and using this book?
Well, it's anyone with conflict challenges. And when I began to do this, my idea was that it was for the general public, for anybody who is in a conflict or is expecting one, is anticipating that it could happen. And so that was my starting point. However, because I'm a certified coach and a mediator, what I realize is that I use questions all the time, and that people who are in the practitioners in the conflict management field, or even if it's HR and leaders, lawyers, psychologists, as you've mentioned, people ask questions, and that maybe questions that are framed in a way that would help people look at things differently and explore a little bit differently would be helpful to them as well. And so the audience really is not just the public who might want to do that, but for anyone who wants to help other people explore conflict more fully.
Okay, very good. Because as I was even, as a conflict coach myself, as I was reading through a number of the questions, I find it immediately helpful for myself as I think through situations I might be in, but I kept thinking, wow, these are really powerful questions in helping others, whether in a mediation or especially in a conflict coaching situation. So what actually motivated you to go this place? Because I know you're really passionate about questions. So what motivated you to write this book?
Well, it's a great question, and I think that it started, Patty, with because I'm fascinated with questions, and that goes back to my coach training many years ago, where I found that no matter what I had done before as a lawyer and as a mediator in my training, I hadn't explored just how deep a question can go to help people shift their thoughts and their insights and their perspectives. And so I started a blog some years ago called Conflict Mastery Questions, and it really evolved as I started to understand the power of questions, and I heard from my coaching clients when they talked about their experience and they started to use metaphors and puns and different kinds of expressions, that when I used those expressions and asked them more about them, then it somehow took them to different places. So, for instance, if somebody said, well, she looked like she had a chip on her shoulder, then if I asked, tell me what the chip looked like, or what was that like, and used that whole analogy of a chip on the shoulder, then I was starting to hear how people thought differently, and it just fascinated me. And I think that's what led me to the blog and then developing it and thinking that it really was worthy of a book to make the exploration deeper and to share with people just how exciting it is to use the kinds of expressions we use all the time about conflict, but to take them to a different level.
It was amazing when I was flipping through the book, and I was looking all the like you said, chip on the shoulder is one of the ones that stood out for me, or you make me so angry. There's a number of really good actual metaphors, like getting your ducks in a row or bottling things up. You have a number of things that are in your book, and I was just like, wow, I hear that all the time, and we kind of take that for granted. And I love the way that you turn that and use that as a resource because it's something that the client or the person you're working with really resonates with. Now, earlier when I was introducing you and stuff, and I've heard you talk about this for many years now, which is the reference to conflict intelligence. And a lot of people, kind of puzzle and they cock their head like a curious little dog and say, what does that mean? So what does that mean, conflict intelligence mean, and how does this connect with asking questions?
Well, it was a number of years ago that I started to use that because it appeared to me, I was reading some about, as we have for years, emotional intelligence has been out there, and then social intelligence. And I thought, how come we don't hear much about conflict intelligence, if anything, at the time, although I do know that that expression is being used by others as well. Although I hadn't heard it, and I thought that it really referred to the proficiency, that is the knowledge and skills and ability needed to engage in and manage our interpersonal conflicts and disputes. And it goes to, I think, self-reflection for me, and I think that's why questions, the connection for me, Patty, is that one of the things that fascinates me about questions is that it helps people reflect. And when people reflect, they are more likely to move from a reactive place in their brain to a more reflective and therefore responsive way of dealing with conflict. And so I find that what we learn by being self-reflective and gaining insights, that it really is the bedrock of change if you can build self-awareness. And so for me, that's what conflict intelligence is all about, that people, the book is called Conflict Mastery. For me, once people become conflict intelligent and more aware, they've achieved one part of conflict mastery, and then the next part is, how does this happen? How does this shift my way of being in conflict now that I think differently? So I think there's a huge connection of questions about helping people get to a place where they can be in conflict in a way that's more aligned with how they want to interact in that particular situation.
Okay, very good. So I just want to let folks know that we are at the halfway point, and we have a lot to still cover, and I appreciate folks who are joining us in the chat room and the Twitter feed and also in our studio. So I do encourage you to write your comments or questions in the chat room there. We're not taking live callers, so if you are on your computer, blogtalkradio.com/Texas-conflict-coach to join us in the chat room. And so you are listening with myself, Patty Porter, your host, and Cinnie Noble, who's with CINERGY Conflict Coaching in Toronto, and she's talking about her newest book, Conflict Mastery Questions to Guide You. And so we're going to continue with our conversation, and that is, how do you yourself use these questions in your coaching, and how is it different when you're in mediation?
Well, I think that there are a lot of similarities. The coaching model that I have, as you know, is a 7-step model. It's incremental, and it builds on steps that people take from where they are to where they want to be. And questions help move people along. So they build up slowly from people looking at their goal to where they want to be. And so questions help people think differently. And as I mentioned earlier, and so how I use them in my coaching practice, I use a lot of questions. I would say, as a certified coach, it's one of the core competencies that we learn and that is required of us in our certification. So I use that to help people do more self-discovery. And in mediation, similarly, it's really the same premise. That is, can you look at this differently? Can you understand where the other person's coming from? Is there a way to have an experience that's different from what you have, a perspective that's different? And questions help do that.
Okay, so really there's not a lot of difference. I mean, the approach might be just a slightly bit different in the coaching, but really it's, like you said, it's about moving them to thinking differently about their own situation or even about the other person. Now, you're very well known in your blog writing about the metaphors that you mentioned a couple already, like the chip on your shoulder. So talk a little bit about metaphors and other ways to frame some of those questions and how that's helped to elaborate any further that you would like from what you said earlier.
Well, I think that I'm going to start by saying that metaphors are essentially comparisons that help us summarize or explain an event or a person. That is, they help us create a mental map quickly and with minimal effort. Those last few words come from a definition in a book called Coaching with the Brain in Mind. So I'm going to just repeat it, a mental map quickly and with minimal effort. They help us create a mental map quickly and with minimal effort. So, for instance, if I say there's an elephant in the room, we all have a vision that there's something big there that no one wants to go to. And that, just saying that, will bring up for the people in the room, yes, there's something here. Or she's making a mountain out of a molehill. We know what that means. It does strike up a visual. And any visual, you mentioned a chip on the shoulder earlier, mending fences, any of these kinds of expressions conjure up a vision for us. And so metaphors help the clients who are stuck or having difficulty expressing their experience of the other person or of conflict. And if if a person starts to use language at all like that, and I usually rely on the client to do it rather than me conjure up something. If people are used to using those expressions or they come into it, then they've really given you the gems of what's happening for them. Then it makes it easier for people to become unstuck or to think differently, and it goes back to stepping back, and sometimes it can even create humor for people. So the conflict experience is not as intense, and it's descriptive. It becomes much more about using other parts of your brain and your thinking processes to be able to process what's going on for you.
So let's say, I'm going to give you an example, and we could just kind of play off of each other. If a client, you were working with a client, coaching them, and they're like, I feel like I'm in quicksand, how would you turn that around? Because you're using their words is what I'm understanding, what you're trying to get listeners to understand about that. So I'm in quicksand, or I'm drowning in quicksand. How would you turn that around as a question?
Well, I think it's not so much turning around as having people describe what that is. So it's a very good example that maybe people don't have other words, and that seems to be descriptive. And so I might say, when I think about quicksand, tell me more what you think when you think about quicksand. What's that experience like? So getting people to describe the experience when they might not be able to describe maybe the emotion, but what the feeling, what the impact is on them.
Yes.
And so I might continue that discussion with what would it be like if the sand wasn't quick, if it was firm? What would that feel like? What do you need to get there? I mean, there would be a process of words. It wouldn't be questions. It wouldn't be one after another so quickly as I've described. But I would use the imagery for somebody to look at. If you weren't on quicksand, what would you be on, and how would you get there? What do you need to build to get there?
And that is so powerful, because it comes, as you said, it comes from them. You're not imposing your mental maps and metaphors. You're using what they're bringing up. And for some, they use a lot of metaphors, and other people don't use as many or any at all. So being able to tap into something that they've already, as you said, this mental map, which is quickly and with minimal effort. So it's rich and powerful, just how you described it. And I appreciate you playing along with me on that quicksand
no
example.
problem.
Now, in your, I'm going to go back to the book specifically, the way that it's formatted again. And I think for a lot of listeners, this might be the first time they really hear or understand that when we think about conflict, that there is a before, during, and after. And so you, in each of the sections, as I was looking through them, you're giving these examples, and they're not all metaphors, some expressions, etc., that you have categorized. So in particular, in the after conflict section of your book, there is a topic called letting go. This comes up all the time. People are like, well, you need to let go. Well, how do I let go? Well, you just need to let go, So it seems for a lot of people it's hard for them to do that, and especially with things that are said in conflict. And then, of course, then it becomes a lingering experience for them, and they ruminate about it. So tell us about this, for example, this topic and the types of questions you might suggest with this letting go topic.
Well, and I was just going to go back to what you said. So before, during, and after, each of the topics, and again, they might not be metaphors. It might just be the common experience that people have. So you're quite right. Letting go in the after is a common one that people who have trouble with resilience that might come up with. There might be in a before one, speaking up. There might be in a during one, body language that people are noticing. So the topics are all the kinds of things that could happen before, during, and after, and sometimes metaphors are used or expressions. Letting go is one of those things that people experience. So after each topic, when there's a topic, there is then about 100 words that describes the experience of letting go, or what the reasons might be. So for instance, the topic on letting go would have a little bit about the fact that sometimes blame stays on, or regret, wishing we'd said or done something differently, hurt feelings. So there's about 100 words that describes what the experience of letting go and not letting go is about. And that happens for all of the topics. And then it's followed by 12 questions. Each topic is followed by 12 questions. So this one would have things like, what are you holding on to? And what makes it difficult to let go of them? What may happen if you let go? What may not happen? what part may you let go of first? So there are those types of questions that take the topic and help people dissect it and deconstruct the experience to see if they're able to step back and have a different look at what's happened to them around that particular expression that they might use or the experience they have of not letting go.
You know, I love that. I appreciate you breaking out again how each section looks, and it's a really easy read in the sense that it's very user friendly, and so I'm going to pick one here that also stood out for me. I mean, you have some great stuff. I'll have to just carry it around with me everywhere I go when I'm working with my clients, but for myself too, because I look at this and I'm thinking, man, you know, we've been doing conflict for a long time, right? We help people, we study it, and yet I look at these questions, I'm like, wow, that was a great way that she worded that, or another way to think about that, even for myself. So, but one of the ones I'm looking at now, Chapter 3, during conflict, which is fears about tears. Love that, because so many people are afraid about, well, they're going to cry, and not just a woman, a man too. And so, you know, you had some really good questions about, you know, well, what fears did you experience about the other person's tears in that situation? How realistic were the fears, scaling from 1 to 5? And you know, so it gets, some of the questions are actually multifaceted questions. Tell me a little bit about that piece of it.
Yeah, I think that they are multifaceted because sometimes some of that had to do with the fact that I was trying to keep to 12 questions and there were so many fantastic questions to ask, and it raised so many for me that I just doubled up on ones such as scaling ones. And I think, you know, scaling questions are really great for people to evaluate. For instance, if you say, you know, how are you feeling on a 1 to 5 right now about this, 5 being absolutely terrible and 1, I can live with it. And then a last question being, how do you feel now on that same scale? And I think in coaching that those are great questions as well. And some of that has to do with people being able to evaluate, have they shifted? And if they haven't, then the coach can say, what's going on then? What would help you shift? And I think some of it is helping people look differently in a way with, for instance, I think sometimes at the beginning of the book, there's a poem by David White, and one of the things that White says is, I love this question, is what question has no right to go away? And I think just asking people questions that are so different from where they go and what they're thinking, that we have inside of us sometimes that niggling feeling that we will answer something that's so absurd that we've never thought of before when we wouldn't otherwise answer a question that seems more straightforward.
You know, one other tactic that I also noticed in the questions, and for lack of a better phraseology, I'm sure you'll clarify it, is you ask the opposite, the yin and the yang of the question. So let me just give you an example, and you could spell more, because I think it's a very powerful strategy that you use. So back to the fear about tears. So you have the first question, what do you know or think about the other person was crying about in that situation? And immediately another question, well, what do you not know for certain about the reasons for hers? So I like the fact that you kind of use the opposite or the yang of the question. Say more about that for listeners.
Yeah, I think, Patty, what I have realized over time is that we a lot of us have questions that we ask that seem really quite practical. You know, what do you know, or what's going on? But we don't usually ask those yin and yang ones, the opposite ones. And what I realized was how powerful that was to ask somebody the opposite, that all of a sudden I was seeing with my clients that was a question they hadn't asked, the one that had no right to go away. So I find that they are really powerful and useful to have, and I use them all the time, and such that when I follow up with clients, they tell me that those are the ones that often stick out for them, just the ones they wouldn't have expected that they were going to be asked.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, good. I'm glad that you clarified that, because those are incredibly powerful, and you have a number of those in the book for those who are wanting to use this as a tool for themselves or for helping other people. So why don't we give you an opportunity to describe maybe some of the kinds of situations where the book is helpful?
Well, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I think if you are anybody who's, whether you're a practitioner or not, but you just want to sort something out, just as you have found, and here you are, somebody who's experienced in the field a long time, you still have conflict like anybody else, and when things come up, it's a great way to start to move ourselves from getting too immersed in a conflict. So the before piece is, as soon as you start to sense vibrations, something's going on, it's a great time to stop yourself, and to similarly during conflict. And when you're not being resilient. So the before, during, and after, I think, are great situations. I've made the book reproducible. So before, this is particularly for practitioners. It occurred to me as the book was coming out that if practitioners are going to use it effectively, it would be great for them to be able to photocopy pages without, they don't have to contact me for permission. And so they're the sort of thing that you might give a coaching client in between a session if they are talking about a certain aspect of before, during, or after. And similarly with mediation clients, to if people are going to meet again or when you've had a first session with them, to something to help people just do more analysis, more thought, more reflections on what the particular things are that might be keeping them from looking at moving forward.
Very good. Okay, so that, yes, I appreciate you saying that, and I assume that in the book, and I didn't see that permission is in the book so that people know that they can do that?
It's not in the book, the small book that I think you probably have in front of you, Patty. I've made it since in a larger book, 8 by 11, so that people can write in it, and it says at the bottom that there's permission for people to copy that. Okay.
Now, do you have a different version of this book or a workbook, or?
It's the exact same book. It's only 8 by 11 with more room, because the current book is small, 6 by 9, and there isn't room for people to write in their answers. So the reproducible workbook, there's room for people to be able to write in their answers about it. Now, it's not in Word. It's not through the computer. So it's getting the book and copying the pages the good old-fashioned way.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so that's good to know. All right, so we're going to start going to our closing section, and as you know, and as a lot of good coaches who do a lot of field work with their clients that choose to do that, so do you have an assignment for our listeners this week?
Well, I was thinking about this, and I thought, well, it had to be a question. And so my thought is that when the next time, whether it's this week or the following week, whenever it might be, inevitably there'll be a time when you might be around somebody who does something that irritates, that provokes. And when that happens, to ask yourself 2 questions. What do I need from this person that she or he doesn't realize? And what might she or he need from me that I'm not delivering on? So 2 questions. What do I need from this person that she or he doesn't realize? And what might she or he need from me that I'm not delivering on? So this is usually an interpersonal relationship you have when you start to get provoked and something's coming up where a dispute could easily emerge. To do some need questions.
All right. So one more time, what do I need from this person that he or she doesn't realize, and what might he or she need that I'm not delivering or that I'm not providing? Did I say that correctly? Okay. I know I didn't say it as good as you, but I want to make sure.
No, you got the essence.
Okay, good. We'll have that on Twitter too in our chat room. I just typed that up and everything. All right, so listeners, that's your assignment for the week. And the other thing that I want to remind you for those who came in on the studio or in the chat room a little bit later is that we are doing a giveaway. So the first person to share one takeaway or one thing that really stood out for you today about this episode will get a copy of Cinnie's book, Conflict Mastery, Questions to Guide You. Now, to do that, we ask you can do it one of 3 ways. One, you can Twitter at TX Conflict Coach and say, this is my takeaway. Facebook, Conflict Connections, that is my Facebook page, and you can make a post there. Or email me at Patty, Pattie, at connections.com and let us know that you listened to the episode, and then let us know what your takeaway was for this episode today. Now, where can listeners then purchase the book and books? Because there's the original Synergy Model conflict coaching book and this book here. So where do they go to do that?
Well, you can go to my site, which is, as you mentioned, www.cinergycoaching at CINERGY coaching.com. They are also available on Amazon.com and Amazon.ca. And also for people in Europe, it's Amazon.UK. So when you go to my website, you can see all the various places, Amazons, that the book is available from. You can get it in digital format, workbook format, and the 6x9 format all through Amazon.
Okay, very, very good. So synergycoaching.com, and also I was posting about your blog because you're still continuing to do your blog. This is a weekly blog where you are. Are you continuing your conflict mastery questions on this blog, or is the blog have a different focus?
So right now what I'm doing this 3 times a week is just 2 or 3 sentences on a topic and then one question, one powerful question. So, for instance, it might be on getting defensive, and there will be a bit about what happens when we get defensive, so just 1 or 2 sentences, and then a question might be, when you are getting defensive, what are you defending? So that, just a short, pithy, 3 times a week, one question only per blog.
Okay, great. And the one that you posted yesterday was on temper tantrums.
Temper tantrums, that's right.
And I've seen them lots in adults.
Exactly. So they are. That's on the conflict mastery questions, and that's also on the site. So you just go to blog. The blog heading is blog. If people want to subscribe, they are welcome to do that.
Okay, great. Now, you do a number of trainings. Well, the Synergy coaching model is trained throughout the world. So is there anything in particular that you want to highlight now, either some presentation you're going to be at, a workshop that's happening, anything that you want folks to know about right now?
Well, there are workshops that are being held in Australia, New Zealand, Ireland. I've just come back from Istanbul. One in Toronto coming up. There's one in Ottawa as we speak. And so they are in different parts of the world, and if people want to hold them in their particular cities or workplaces, they can contact me, because in any given year that comes up where people say, could you come here and do that? Also, though, the training happens by telecourse and webinar for people who can't travel or don't want to, or it's too far, expensive, or it's not convenient. And so those are weekly sessions that are done by phone or webinar. So trying to make it as available as possible to people who are interested in this kind of process and learning it. And it's a 4-day workshop when it's face-to-face, and that many hours in the other telecourse webinar formats, a little bit less in those formats, but lots of chance to give people practices to be able to learn that. And following the training, people get a newsletter every month and an opportunity to participate in practice talks, which is a monthly call, just to keep your skills going.
Okay, so lots of opportunities not only to learn, but to also have this community of practice that you've been building with other conflict coaches around the world. Now, what is the best way for them to find you or communicate with you through the website, or is there any other information you want to share with them about how to get a hold of you?
Well, always welcome to contact me at Cinnie, CINNIE, at CINERGY coaching.com. And also on the website, there's a chance to do a contact sheet there as well. And I answer fairly quickly, so whatever way works for people, that's fine. I'll look forward to it.
Okay. All right. So you're going to get the final message. I want to first of all thank you so much for being a returning guest and educating our listeners, and that's a big mission of ours, as you know. And I really appreciate your valuable expertise and time and your passion for doing this work and teaching and helping our listeners raise their own awareness. So, Cinnie, what final message would you like to leave with listeners tonight?
Well, I guess the final message is that we all that the conflict is a choice. How we want to be and how we want to interact, it's a choice. And we have that opportunity when we are in a situation that is upsetting us, or where we might go to one place that won't serve us well, is to always to be able to step back and ask ourselves, what's the question I'm not asking myself right now that I need to?
Very good. All right. Thank you, Cinnie, very much. Thank you, guests, for joining us in our chat room, our studio, and our Twitter feed, and have a good night.
Thanks, Patty.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you've enjoyed the program. You can find over 300 podcasts archived to listen at your own convenience at texasconflictcoach.com, or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. To learn about upcoming radio programs and resources, sign up for our monthly e-newsletter.